working. Look at us. We're like early.
I see it.
We're early today. I can't believe it. This is
okay.
A record.
And I got the notification, so everything is good.
So, hi everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be another Bashment Book Club live show, and we are going to be talking about Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clayton. And we're reading this in honor of Latinx Heritage Month. We're reading a Hispanic Caribbean book because this book is set in Cuba. Who's summarizing the book?
I could do my best. I'll summarize the present day stuff, and you can summarize the past stuff.
Sure, yeah,
Let's do that. Okay, so there's 2 point of views. The one I'm going to be talking about is the one that is in present day. Her name is Marisol. She is the granddaughter of the person we see in the past perspective. She's going to Cuba because her grandmother has just passed away, and her one request was to have her ashes scattered across Cuba in a place that she loved, and the granddaughter is trying to find out what that place was. And she stays with her grandmother's best friend, and she discovers that there's a really hot grandson there that she's sort of into, and they have a little romance.
Just a little bit, just a
little one.
Just un poco. And yeah, look at me. So the next timeline that we're following is in 1958. We're following Elisa, who is Marisol's grandmother, sorry. And Elisa is part of an elite group in society, and it's obviously taking place during the time of the Cuban Revolution, when the elite was overthrown, and people who were associated with the very corrupt leader at the time, Batista, had to be exiled and moved out of Cuba or whatever. So Elisa is very much on the side of the high in society. She's very much one of the unpopular people. But then she ends up falling in love with a hot revolutionary who's fighting beside Castro. So her views gets challenged, and she gets to experience the revolution on 2 sides of the coin. So it's a really interesting story about exile and love and longing and revolution, and it's a very, very, very political book. It's a lot more political than I expected it to be, which is cool.
Yeah. So what were your overall thoughts of this book? I know we all had very differing opinions about the beginning of it.
Yeah, when I started, I felt like it was a little bit kind of boring. I didn't really know what to expect of it, and I just kind of went in with the idea that it was going to be just a fluffy romance novel. I don't know why. As I said, I didn't expect that it would be so political and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with a fluffy romance novel, but that's not really my jam. So the first few chapters were kind of just mellow and not really so action-packed as the rest of the book. There comes a point where you just can't stop reading. I would say after about 50 to 100 pages, you're just gonna fall off the deep end, and you're not gonna stop reading until you're done. It's that good.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think what I've told everyone since I finished, get past chapter 10, and then it'll really start to pick up. But I feel like in hindsight, those first 10 chapters really set the stage for the dual perspective. So if you didn't have the first few chapters, you wouldn't understand the importance of the airport scene for Marisol and for Elisa, because both of them had a very turning point airport experience, right? That was very crucial to the storyline. So I definitely think when people are talking about, I didn't learn anything in this book, I don't think you're going to walk away from, even though it's a fictional story, it's still bedded in lived experiences, what I can imagine, because I'm not Cuban. But I thought it was really interestingly written, from not only that people thought that they were making good decisions, but how sometimes those good decisions don't always pan out the way you expect them to. But in the essence of it is, how do you identify with your Cubanness, right? And your nationality, and how does that look if you stay versus if you left? And I think that is so true of most immigration or migration stories. Like you left, how connected can you really be because you're not experiencing the suffering? So I thought like there are all of these sub storylines within the story that you have to, if you don't enjoy this book, it's because you are expecting for a romance or historical fiction, you know what I mean? Or you don't like dual perspectives. Something else is going on because it's definitely a very layered story.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I was in it from the get-go just because I sort of knew what I was expecting because it's a Reese's pick, so I sort of know from work like what kind of books she picks for her book club. But I found that my enjoyment of the perspective switched because in the beginning I was very in Marisol's story because it's set in the present day. She's like worried about getting through security because she has the ashes. Like there's like something there from the beginning. And for Elisa, you're not really sure what's going on in the beginning. You just know that they're leaving. Like you don't have the context for that moment. But then I found toward later parts, I was like over Marisol's story because there's only so much you can do with that perspective. And then I was really interested in Elisa toward the end. So it was very interesting how that like switched for me, like what I was more interested in. And I think it was just the Marisol story sort of reminded me of the character from Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because they're both journalists. So the way they viewed the world was very similar. And it gets kind of grating after a while because it was the same with that where I didn't really like the journalist character. I liked the person she was writing about more. So
yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I feel like this book it read in a way where you could have easily removed Marisol's part, and I'm not saying that her part was essential to the story because it definitely added a whole new dimension to it. But this book could have been just as easily engaging and interesting if it was just Elisa. Like Elisa's story didn't depend on Marisol's story in the way that Marisol depended on Elisa, and maybe that's because her story happened first. It was the precursor to what Marisol was. And I also felt like maybe the author kind of wrote Elisa with a little bit more, I don't know, love and interest.
Yeah. Yeah. What I was gonna say is, that message I put in the group text that I thought Marisol was actually a side character, not a main character, but you needed her because you needed to see Elisa's story through like this loving lens, and how sometimes we romanticize our elders when they don't tell us everything, and their stories are so rooted in survival, in generational customs and social norms, and what we hear is the glossy version. So we needed Marisol, but to me, she was inconsequential. And to perfectly honest, I wanted a little bit more of Pablo. I'm like, who is this dark skinned man from the mountains?
I'm
done. Country. I wanted a little bit more of that, but I don't know if we're gonna, in another book, we're gonna get a little bit more of Marisol and Lewis's story, which I did look to see. The second book is Beatrice, and I'm definitely gonna read that because which I don't think we should say what she says in the last few chapters because I feel like that would be too spoilerly. But when
there's one line she says, that you're like, oh no, I need to read the second book.
Yeah, for sure. I'm
what
like,
the fuck?
whoa!
Yeah.
So
I
really
talk
liked
about
her.
the cover for a second. I never paid much attention to the cover, but when I look at it, it's kind of cool. I think the area underneath the cover is where they ended up spreading her ashes. And if you notice, she kind of fades, like on the top of it, that's Elisa, right? She kind of fades to the bottom. It's almost as if you could see her like blending in with
Look at you.
With all of the symbolism.
Yeah. It feels like if she's like blending into it, and it's like she's there in both pictures. You just don't see her much in the second one.
So I was thinking about where they live too, where it is behind these gated communities, which is, if I'm pretty sure I know where it is. It's true. It's like very jarring where you will come from this area from the book. Then there's like a little residential area, and then it's like a completely different part of the island that is pretty central in Havana, and then you start to drive out, and it becomes a little bit more industrial and rural. So where I think Elisa and her family lives is like these palatial, stately places, and it feels out of place. And so I was trying to imagine living there, working there, knowing that you lived on the other side of the gates, and these homes are like untouched almost from what you're experiencing.
I feel like every island has something like that, though. Like, because I'm thinking of Barbados, we have the West Coast is pretty much where all like the celebrities will stay because they have the huge mansions there, and most of us don't live in those huge mansions on the beach. So I feel like there is always that aspect of the like haves and the have-nots in such a small place. So go ahead.
I was agreeing with you.
Because I feel like this is the first time we write about somebody who was a have. In one of our books.
Which I actually not. This is going to sound bad, but I appreciate it, right? Because the story still talks about suffering, right? Just from a different perspective, and everyone has a role in either maintaining this suffering, or you're suffering just in a different way that you don't often read about. And I appreciated that privilege was in the central point. Like, yes, we have, but we also realize that we're privileged. But that privilege in this environment also comes at a cost.
And also too, she talks about like the constraints of being a woman in her family and stuff, and how she didn't have the ability to like go to university or do anything like that. That was interesting. It was hard for me to empathize with her because I'm generally more like I empathize with the poor and the masses who are struggling as opposed to rich people problems, because I feel like there were a lot of things that weren't necessarily, it was brought up, but it wasn't necessarily challenged that much with Elisa's privilege and stuff. And I think it was done so that we could, love her and empathize with her as a character. Because I feel like, I don't think they ever explicitly mentioned that Elisa's dad runs a sugar factory,
plantation,
right? And do you know, just a couple of generations ago, what was going on in sugar plantations? What wealth that wealth that they off of, right?
They were like descended from the corsair who was like a French pirateer, like all this stuff, like.
Yeah, and it's like they were slave owners, and they took that wealth with them to Miami, and they continued
that's the other thing
until Elisa's death. So Elisa's entire life, she's benefited off of the same kind of white privilege that a lot of white people benefit off of. And I felt like, I'm not saying that needed to be addressed in the context of this story, but that's definitely something that was at the back of my mind, where I felt like, I feel your struggle, Elisa, and I feel for you, but at the same time, like, I get why what's happening to you is happening to you,
And it was also, I feel like she tried to like talk about it in the book, because Luis does mention, and I think Pablo does too, that there are people with darker skin who obviously are less privileged even than them, who are fighting. So like, she did try to talk about it, but because of who's centered in the story, it isn't something we can really discuss. So maybe we'll see more of it in Beatrice's story. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully. I want to see more stories about, like, I don't want to say people of color in Cuba, because I know that term gets a little bit more fuzzy with how a lot of Latinx people identify, but like black and brown people maybe is a better way of saying it, because Cuba has like almost 10% of Cuba is people of indigenous heritage, and almost 20% of Cuba, and Cuba has like 10 million, so almost 20% of Cuba is black. So that's like, what, 2 million people alone in Cuba who are black, but you never hear about black.
Exactly. You don't see those people in the media either.
Cubans, and we're talking about like millions of people, right? So
so I think it's because we don't hear about those people, because the European standard of beauty, when you think about Cubans, you usually think about the ones with the European characteristics. And didn't it come up in the book where the Perez family was proud of that they looked more European than not? Did I make that up? I felt like that was Oh, that was a conversation.
I feel like they were proud of
there.
they were proud of like their heritage, like the Spaniard
Yeah,
royalty,
yeah.
whatever. That
Yes,
was mentioned.
because the
And
mother came from royalty. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Another reason why you don't hear about like Black Cubans and indigenous Cubans and stuff is because they never exiled to Miami because they weren't a part of the elite group who had to
So
leave.
they couldn't.
So they
very true.
they were isolated in Cuba, and the Cubans that have the loudest voices are the Cubans outside of Cuba, most of whom are white.
Yeah.
Did you see the comment? Somebody who's third generation Cuban American says that her abuelitas are super racist. So like I feel like colorism is like just a thing in the Caribbean that people don't realize.
Yeah.
It's so freaking prevalent. Wow, can't talk today. That's fine.
In every country. Thanks for that. Thanks for that purple cat 346. Phone was literally ringing.
So I have a question for y'all. Which romance was the romance that hit you harder out of these two that we have? Pablo, 100%. Agreed. I feel like that was the stronger of the two. I feel like there wasn't like we're supposed to care that Luis between Pablo and Elisa.
No, between Marisol and Luis.
Well, like, they're supposedly in love.
I felt like both of them were very insta-lovey, but the romance that felt most real was Elisa and Pablo. But they were very insta-lovey too because they was loving each other since they first see each other
at the party. Yeah,
I forgive it because I feel like she's never met anybody like him, so she was just like a little like puppy, like
And it felt real, you know. Sometimes I have insta love where the characters fall together really quick, but the author is really good at writing that between the two characters, and I felt that a lot with Elisa and Pablo. They also had a lot more stakes going on. They had a lot more tension because they were separated all the time and stuff like that. Luis and Michael's romance was the only time it had stakes was closer to the end when Luis was getting in trouble for his blog and stuff.
But even then, I wasn't worried about him.
Yeah.
Were we okay with the age difference? Because initially I was like, wait, what?
How old was she?
She was 19
and he was in his 30s.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that, to be honest.
I didn't think about, you remember, like, I think like back in those days that was actually very common. Like, you know, men used to like get older and date like younger women or marry like younger women because the men would have to go to school and get a job and do all of those different things, especially in the elite groups. But I didn't really.
I it now, and I'm like, I always thought he was like late. Like in my brain, he's like late 20s because I think my brain reconciles with like age gap. But it's not stated. I'm like,
a problem, you know, like because I feel like I'm not saying I'm okay with it. Like it is definitely weird to think of a 19-year-old with a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
Even if it's legal or whatever, because you're at two completely different stages in your life. But I feel like back then it was normal, so it wasn't something that the characters second guessed.
Well, he did initially, didn't he? Say you're young, right?
Oh yeah, I feel like that. Yeah, I feel like he did when they were walking the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was just kind of like like you know, something that needed to be addressed.
Right.
Like let's just put it on the table that we have an age difference so we can move on with the rest of the romantic plotline.
Yeah.
So
let's get to that.
The age difference.
Okay.
I was very surprised that this was a fade to black romance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I saw a lot of reviews that it was like steamy romance, and I was like,
yes, I was like bracing myself, like, okay, here comes the sex scene, and then it was like they woke up the next day, and I was like, oh,
it
was like very smooth.
I appreciate it because then I feel like the focus was more on the compatibility and, you know, them getting to know each other, and the intimacy part was less about the actual but more about like, you know, how are we going to sustain this because we come from two different lives.
Yeah.
Purple Cat brings up a good point that the age dynamic is a good commentary about like the elite groups, because realistically she would have been paired with somebody who was way older than her if it was her mom pairing people. So like that is a good point. it was accurate to its time. It was just like a good thing for. I forgot she was 19. I thought she was like in her 20s. I was like, whatever. It's fine.
When the other thing that happened, I think she was in her. She was 20.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure if how much of spoilers we're gonna say.
I feel like we always just talk about at this point, if you're here, we've read the book.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about like real spoilers because I mean we have to talk about some of the things that happened.
The second half of that book is fire. Like everything is so good from the second half of the book.
I remember I told y'all I thought I was spoiled from a review.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I wasn't spoiled because the review said that a dead relative turns out to have not been dead, and I assumed right then and there that it was Alejandro. So I thought that Alejandro
would have been so good.
Yes.
But so like when he actually died, and then that's when I realized, oh wait, Pablo is alive.
Yes.
He died. Because I was like, wait, Pablo is. When Elisa got the news that he died, I believed it right off the bat. I was like, oh yeah, Pablo dead.
Yeah, I was waiting for it to happen. Yeah.
Then when she said she stared into her brother's cold dead eyes, I was like, you sure the dead eyes wasn't like moving or something? Or maybe the scene ended and just right after that he was like, oh, okay, back to life. And then I was like, oh wait, no, the brother died, so that means the man's still alive, Pablo.
Yeah.
So
I knew as soon as the guy came into the room and she was describing him looking at the wedding ring, like the ring that she was wearing that was from the box. I was like, oh, he's alive. Cool. Good to know.
So I thought then that was going to be Alejandro until she made reference.
Hold on, somebody's knocking my door.
Okay.
How dare they?
Yeah. So I definitely thought I thought it was going to be him. I was like, because I don't know. I was just hoping that it was going to be Alejandro because I don't necessarily understand. Well, two things. I felt like there was a lot of missing pieces. So I'm wondering if we're going to learn about Alejandro and Beatrice.
100% we will because they were so close. I feel like we're going to get a lot more of that.
But Alejandro and Pablo were fighting essentially for the same thing, but they saw each other differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were different like groups in the revolution. So some of them didn't. Some of them wanted to overthrow. All of them wanted to overthrow Batista, but not all of them wanted Castro to come into power.
Yeah, like Alejandro's people didn't like Castro.
Yeah, Alejandro was anti-Batista and anti-Castro, but Pablo, anti-Batista, pro-Castro.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize they were calling them the bearded ones, which to me sounds very similar of how we call, like, in history, they refer to like savages, like the bearded ones are from the mountains and they're unorganized. But I was like, that seems like a narrative that we've heard somewhere else. But
and it makes sense too because they're like, they're up in the mountains. They don't have time to shave. They're trying to plan out.
It made sense logically. I was like, oh, this is why. It's like when he like shaved when he met her. It's because he would have a beard if he was in the mountains and not like it all made sense. Hi, Injiri.
Hi.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, we'll take your hot minute, girl. Okay.
Yeah, if you haven't read next year in Havana, though, be careful because we're like in spoiler.
We're spoiling everything.
Can we talk? Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Can we talk about Christina's hot takes? One.
Wait.
Christina is the wife.
The wife.
Yeah.
Luisa's wife.
I was just imagining her having like nothing but resting bitch face. But when we got to actually hear how awful her circumstances were, I'm like, you know what? She deserves it. Let her be mean to every woman that comes into the
Luisa's life.
But it's a specific word for their restaurant, Palador.
Oh.
Which I visited too, and I didn't get the historical context once I was there, but seeing it in the book, I was like, oh gosh, I'm such a tourist, and I feel awful. But there was this quote. Hold on, let me refer to my notes.
Your copious note taking.
I tapped it up a little bit too.
Yeah,
I didn't. Am I the only one?
Listen, if I'm going to tell people read this book, I want to reference specific pages. But
I want to learn more about the revolution, so I tapped off some of the little anecdotes about it so that I could kind of see the other perspectives and stuff.
Yeah.
So there was that part about the different types of exiles, which I thought was like, oh, sorry, I'm not in frame. I thought that was really interesting. And I don't think I've ever paid attention to it. But when Christina was like, to be a woman in Cuba is to suffer, I had to put the book down for a little bit.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I was like,
that's such a good.
That was such a good, like, indication of like her story arc, because I think the natural assumption would to be that she's just a scorned woman, she's not in love or whatever, but she tried to leave, she tried to make changes, but because of the circumstances she just couldn't, and so she had to live in this life that essentially is not going to be the life that she wanted for herself, and probably nobody will want for themselves. So I just thought,
and it makes
go ahead.
It makes sense for the way she was with Luis, like because she doesn't want him doing the things he's doing, because she's already tried and her family died. So like that added an extra layer to that entire conversation he had.
And can you imagine her seeing all of the things that she asked her husband to do, and this little hot little tail come in the house, her house, and now he's just like, okay, I'll do better. It's just like, I will scratch you in your face and draw blood. Maybe
How did you guys feel about
I was gonna say
I'm gonna
mediate. I'm gonna mediate.
I was just gonna like build on what Linnell was saying. So I was just gonna say, I'm glad you brought up the idea of different types of exiles, because there's a difference between like rich Cubans who fled on a plane versus Cubans after the revolution, poor Cubans who are like on a raft trying to seek it. So that was what I was gonna say.
I didn't realize there was that wet versus dry land.
Wet foot, dry foot.
Yeah. What did you guys think about Luis having to leave at the end? Because I had mixed feelings about the way that went.
Rushed and convenient.
Yeah. Because the whole time they were like talking about like, oh, how are we gonna do this when I go back to the US and you're stuck in Cuba? I was like, if she just like plucks him up and takes him with her, and he's basically like her pet.
Yeah, it felt awkward, like to just just uproot this man who's living this island for his whole life.
Yeah,
and now he's an exile, and
and an illegal, like he got into the country not well. I guess he did get the visa.
He got a visa because they did like the whole her family's rich or whatever.
Wet foot, dry foot thing. I think any Cuban who manages to leave Cuba, I think, and come to the States has the right to asylum.
But didn't they change that after? Castro died, because that's why they said he had to get a visa and all this stuff, because it would have been easier before,
right?
But because of that, there was complications, so he got a visa, and they have like a lawyer now or whatever. I just thought it was like he's like a kept man now, like he has to rely on her. They've known each other for 7 days,
and he's living in her house. So that's the one thing that I was thinking of, like where it felt kind of like he was not trafficked, because I don't want to give life belittle that experience, but literally he had a life, he had income, whether it was consistent or not, but now he's in another country. I think he knows the language, but there are all of these differences that he's going to have to rely on this woman. He's in her house, he's on her family's dime, and it just feels like
it's put him in a compromising position.
I think we're just supposed to assume they live happily, but
no.
He
seems proud, right? Like he talks about like, how am I going to send money to my mother and grandmother, and
it doesn't really match with the rest of the book, because I feel like the book kind of acknowledges that life is so complicated and there's so much things to consider and everything is so layered. And then in the end, you're just like, oh, well, let's just go to Miami and live happily ever after. Like, that's not going to be traumatic and have
but this
so
is
much
why
things.
But this is why I feel like Beatrice is like an icon, because didn't she say something about yes, on 349 she said we can't always know the people we love as well as we think we do, Marisol. Our love is entangled up in our expectations of reality. So I felt like Beatrice was like, oh, you love this man? Okay. I mean, this was in reference to Elisa, right? But I thought that Beatrice was also giving her a reality check that you love people based on the things that you think you know about them. And I think she goes on to say that people keep emotions from them. So I felt like she was like, all right, girl, I trust you, but this sounds crazy. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they're like continued in her book, like if we see a little bit more of them to see what's become of them, because it's so realistic for the most part with the other parts of the story that this part with the happily ever after rushing to a closure.
But I feel like maybe if it's not just that we're supposed to accept the happily ever after, we are at least supposed to take into consideration that Caribbean people or Cuban people help each other when they say that they need help. So I felt like if you didn't want to latch on to the love story, at least you could latch on to Cubans helping Cubans and then walk away from it.
It's true. It's true. Oop, where are my notes? They're so far.
It was good, y'all.
It was really good. I really loved that. The ending is so bittersweet. I was crying.
Yeah.
Not even gonna lie. Tears in my eyes.
I can't imagine like looking back at your homeland and thinking like, my God, I can't go back there. Or when will I ever? That's sad. I was gonna say something too again about Marisol coming down to the end. She's a lot richer than I thought.
Yeah,
because her dad had a private jet.
Private jet.
And I was like,
all right.
You see, that's why it's hard for me to empathize with these people, because okay, I get that the regime is corrupt and whatnot, but like y'all bitches have private jets, and y'all want me to feel sorry for you, and people suffering. And that's why I agree with you, Linnell, that Christina has every right to screw up she face at what's your name again, Marisol, because you have private, you flying around and you come in here and because you get hit by this guy who turned out to be your grandfather and had your best interest at heart, right? So it's like she wasn't even in danger really, and she didn't really think, she didn't have anything making her life hell. And while Elisa's life was hell, Elisa's life was also so good because she had so much riches and so much wealth. And what happened to her because most of Cuban society felt like nobody should have that ludicrous amount of wealth in the first place, which is true. So while again, I'm not like, against any of the things that they experienced or said, I just felt like it was a little difficult for me to empathize with their struggle, because at the end of the day, them bitches was rich.
Yeah, and not like play rich, like a plane waiting for you when you get deplaned in Antigua. So you're like, I just couldn't. I couldn't.
I feel like it was more interesting from Elisa's perspective, because you saw her struggling with like this is my family and this has always been my life and I want to protect that. But also understanding through Pablo that it's wrong. But with like Marisol, she's just rich. I'm like, it works out for them in the end because of that. Like,
that's why I said, honestly, I wouldn't have mind if the story was just Elisa and we didn't really get Marisol. Even though Marisol again added a really cool complex layer. It just
I feel like the Marisol part that I enjoyed was toward the beginning, where she's talking about like her dual identity as a Cuban American. Like she's part of Cuba but also part of America, and she feels like a lost connection to like the country she's supposed to feel so like ingrained with. Like that beginning part was really interesting to me, but then it sort of lost it along the way because she was so out of touch with everything happening and she became disillusioned. And
did Elisa's husband know the baby?
I'm assuming he knew that it wasn't his. Like the timing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the way she was like, he loves him, like he's his own at the end.
Yeah.
She sort of said something that made me think, oh, he knows, like,
Yeah.
the baby isn't his. Plus, they had more kids together, right? It wasn't just her dad.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they did,
No,
They did?
really?
Yeah.
I remember at some point in the book she said something about she had her son and her 3 granddaughters. And her 3
so maybe.
like kids to her.
I think
that's
it's
interesting.
because wasn't that because of the Great Divorce and how when Marisol's mother left and the son?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought there was another kid.
I don't think
so because she treated Marisol like her daughter, so I'm assuming.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah, and I really don't recall Marisol talking. Whenever Marisol talks about her aunt, she's actually talking about her great aunt.
Her great aunt. Yeah, true.
That's why I had to do a family tree because I was like, wait, who is this? Who's Lucia? Like, where did she come from? I come
from a large family where I know all of my second cousins and third cousins. I'm already like rooted in this ability to know family trees and stuff. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I'm like, which one is this?
Auntie, uncle, that kind of thing. So I could.
Okay. What else? Lost the AirPod.
Sorry, if you could hear my baby nephew crying in the background, maybe.
Feed him. Yeah, it's ambiance.
Do we want to use the questions in the back?
Oh my god. Okay, guys. So there is book club questions at the back of this book, and I'm gonna pull them out now because the question that I read out loud earlier. Louise says that everything is political. Do you agree? That was one of the questions.
Yes, everything is political.
That was easy. Okay, next
Bigfoot
question.
romance novel is political.
Oh, didn't you say like one of the reviews that was like negative said this was like a very beachy read?
Yeah, a beachy, fluffy beach read, which I'm like after finishing it, I'm like,
where?
Marisol's part, maybe.
But yeah, like I could see the beginning of the book being like that, but the further in you get, like the less it becomes a beach read.
Maybe they probably just really hated the ending, which was very, bittersweet,
which I loved.
Yeah. I felt
not the ending. The Marisol taking
Louis
back to Miami part. Because that is one thing that I didn't really like about the book.
Did you like? I saw one review said that the dual perspectives wasn't done well, which I disagree with. I
think it was done fine. It just was the stories themselves inverted what was interesting to me.
Yeah, and I feel like there's no way you could do this story and make Marisol's story more interesting.
The main one, yeah. No, you couldn't.
This book is really about Elisa.
Well, Elisa,
in both timelines. Marisol is not even a thing in the first, so you're going to inevitably feel the disconnect with one over the other.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you guys, but I love stories that are told through love letters. I don't know if it's like weird, but I just feel like, oh my gosh, somebody write me a fucking love letter.
Because a WhatsApp love message or something.
Yeah, because it feels like you have to take time and organize.
But like also it was their only form of communication then. It's not like they could send an email if they wanted
to.
It's like Elisa texting in mind, yo, where are you?
Witness me. I'm hungry. Bring me some fries.
I'm with the bearded. I'm with /W/the bearded ones RN right now. We'll call you later, L8R.
Eggplant emoji. I'm ready.
I'm dead.
Oh God. But they wouldn't have had eggplant emojis back then, so he would have had to take a picture of an actual eggplant and send it.
Fair point. Fair point.
Whew.
I wonder if people used to send nudes back in those days, like take pictures of themselves and like have it developed and mail it.
Oh, well, that'd be kind of awkward because you have to go to somebody else to get it developed.
That's true.
Oh my gosh.
We need to research this.
Yeah. Nudes in the 1920s.
Let's just say.
Do that on incognito just so it doesn't come back.
Yeah, put your filters on.
Oh,
Do
okay.
you think?
What's the other book club question?
What parallels do you see between life in modern Cuba and life in pre-revolutionary Cuba? What differences?
I mean, that's hard to say because I feel like we only got the perspective of like upper class people.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about it before. You don't hear about Black Cubans and you don't hear about indigenous Cubans. And I feel like we didn't get the perspective of like what the majority of people in Cuba went through during that time, right? We got like Elisa's perspective, who was part of the elite, and then you kind of understood what Pablo was going through, but even he was part of a relatively small group of revolutionaries. And then you go into the timeline and you have Marisol, who owns a freaking private jet, all right, and is not even from Cuba. And then you have Luis, who's definitely struggling and has a lot, going on, but he makes it clear in the book that he's still very privileged compared to other Cubans. So for me, the parallels, there are some parallels, like, you have to be careful with what you're saying, and you have to, people are watching you and all that kind of stuff. But you only follow a very small group of people in this book, and you don't get to understand like what the wider, like, again, Cuba has 11 million people, y'all.
Which is
y'all know
wild.
how much,
Yeah.
and 20% of Cuba is black, so that's 2 million people, right? That you don't know their stories. They don't have that platform. So it's like, I think about like, who are these other 11 million people that you just don't hear about, and what are their stories? If they had to write a book like this, what would they write?
Yeah.
And I think to your point, Sajid, I can't remember if it's Luis that was explaining the currency.
It was him.
The Cuban peso and the exchange peso. I feel like if there was a storyline explaining that, because it's very complicated, because you see the on goods, you would see the difference, and it's like a huge disparity, and it's essentially separating the Cuban people from economic stability. And so I felt like that was like a sticking point, that if you didn't understand, like, and however you feel about socialism or whatever, but that in itself, the separation in currency, where Cuban people don't often have access to the exchange currency, they only have the Cuban peso, to me was just like, whoa, this is modern day labor oppression, right? Like, so it I can't get my thoughts out, but I felt like that was a modern day example of how people in power make decisions to continue to oppress people. And
it was interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was interesting too, like when they went to the hotel, Luis was explaining that certain people get to work in these hotels and be the front facing people, and they're the ones that get access to this currency.
Yeah.
And that just like further oppresses people who are like not what they want to like promote Cuba as. So it's just like layers to the oppression.
And even the talk about like how we hear there's no violence or crime in Cuba, but it's really no crime against tourists, right? But there's like intercultural violence where Cuban people are harming each other for things like, access to milk, or, saying stop making Cuba look bad. So, yeah. It's very sad.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't have like that much trouble with the different currencies, because in Barbados we do have like the different levels of like what we would pay versus what a tourist will pay if they have their passport on them. For certain stores, they do have the different prices. So like when I go home, I have my Canadian passport now, so I tell my friends if they want anything, let me know, and I'll just buy it while I'm there for cheaper for them. So like we do have something sort of similar.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't have anything,
but it's only like
that.
Yeah, it's only for like certain stores. So like stores tourists will go to, they will have the different prices listed on the back, like books, completely different prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I tell you, I can't remember which other book we were talking about, how tourism is predatory.
Here comes the sun.
Here comes the sun.
I feel like now there's this dissonance in me about being a tourist, especially when I know that a country is struggling economically, but also has to survive off of tourism. I don't know what it is about this book that made me feel like it's almost similar to like a zoo, right? Like you come in, you have access, you see what you want, you take what you want, and then you leave. And but the you know, the content of what you're viewing and consuming stays for your purely entertainment purpose. And I'm like, ooh, I need to sit with this a little bit.
It reminded me of.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, remind me of the Keeping Up with the Kardashians episode. I know I'm trash. I watched them, but when they went to Cuba, there was like a huge uproar about.
They went to Cuba.
They went to Cuba. And it was like a huge uproar about like the way they like romanticized it being like so old school and all this. So like reading this reminded me of how uncomfortable I felt watching those episodes.
And that's the thing with Cuba, like everybody who I know who wants to go to Cuba, the cars, they have old cars and they have old buildings, so quaint. And I'm like, it's like that because they've been barred off from the rest of the world, like that the US put kind of restrictions on them. They can't import things, they can't get resources to develop their country, and you're romanticizing, So we talked about the fact that they've had to find innovative ways to maintain these old cars because they can't import cars. And I'm like, I understand that it might look cute, but like it's the reason for it being that way is not cute, And it's like people know the history of Cuba. People probably don't even know it's an island. Some people probably assume it's part of like the mainland or something.
Oh, probably.
And it's like it's frustrating because it's like you're fetishizing the same way that other Caribbean islands are fetishized for their beaches and stuff, fetishizing this place, and you're going there on these very shallow notes. Like, I mean, I feel like I would love to go to Cuba, but I'm not going to like really like, oh my god, I want to see cute cars, but I want to like see certain things. I want to see because I appreciate the history of the country. And that's why I would want to go there and visit. But even then, I would have to think about like what's my accountability as a tourist who's coming into this place that's not mine, and the privileges that I have, And that's not something tourists think about when they go to other countries. I feel like the problem is maybe not tourism, but the way that tourism happens in our world.
Well, purple cat 3345 is saying yes. Thank you.
I just like this made me want to go to Cuba because of the way she describes it. Like the way the author describes it in the book. But then at the same time, I was wrestling with like I don't know if like I would feel comfortable doing that because there would still be like that bar of like I would be there as a tourist and I would just feel so uncomfortable doing it. So it was like a very interesting read. It makes me like I don't think I'm going to go to Caribbean countries anymore as a tourist. Like I don't think I can do that as a human anymore. Like go to Barbados and that.
But the trouble with that, right,
like
is
visitor. But I think there's a difference between like a
visitor and a tourist. Yeah.
Sorry, Linda, you were saying something.
But the trouble with not going and consuming some of that culture is that economically, some of these countries rely on
tourism.
Yeah, and so it's like this double-edged sword, right? Like
cycle.
If you don't, right, exactly, it's a cycle. If you don't go, then people can't put whatever rations they have on the table, and so it's like. But I do think there's a way that you can consume the culture ethically, right? And whatever that looks like, making sure that your money is actually going to a Cuban citizen, and it's not through like some American or some international organization that's not necessarily trickling down. Or you're eating locally sourced food or whatever. But so I think like I don't have the answer to that yet, because it's really making me think about how I interface with countries, especially that are relying on tourism for stability, when I go, what does that look like now? Because now that my eyes are open, I can't like be naive anymore about it.
Yeah.
I think, also too, it's not really the fault of like individual tourists, because tourists travel within a wider institution, right? So this is what is being accommodated for you. This is what is being provided for you. Like the only options you have is to go with certain agencies and to stay in certain hotels and resorts. So I think that there needs to be a broader movement in the Caribbean. Perhaps there is, that I don't know of it, to find ways, as you said, to create a more ethical way of having people come to the Caribbean and not fetishize the region, but consume the culture in a way that benefits the people and the culture and the country, not just exploit and just leave things in the hands of a few. It happens in Hawaii too. Like, I would love to visit Hawaii, but I don't want to visit Hawaii in the most conventional ways, because I don't want to be that tourist who goes to Hawaii and then takes part in all these luau's and stuff, and I don't know the meaning, I don't know the history, and knowing that a lot of native Hawaiians don't even like doing luau's and these kind of stuff, because they got so, the meaning was stripped away from tourists.
And commercial. I just came back from Hawaii. Why are you putting me on blast?
Again, no, it's not the individual's fault. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not the individual's fault, but it's what's being accommodated for. Like, but this is what you.
No,
if you tell me, Sergeant, come to Hawaii and stay in a resort and your beaches and luau's and stuff. If I didn't know better, I would have been like, yeah. But you're also kind of capitalizing on my desire to consume that.
Right. I think the interesting part about it is that the tourist areas are also not the areas that always encapsulates the culture. So it's the same thing for me when I went to Cuba. When I went out to Vanellis, totally different experience than when I was in Havana. It was because I was in like a rural part, and so I was on a tobacco farm, and no one was accommodating me in English, which I had to like figure out, which was totally fine. My transportation was not a car, it was an oxen.
I love that.
And so, but I made sure that I bought coffee from his farm. So I didn't buy coffee from whatever the distribution center was. But it was the same thing when I was in Hawaii. The further I got away from Waikiki, it felt completely different. And, less commercial, I guess, would be the way to say it. It just felt like the trip that I actually wanted. Like I didn't feel like, I had to move quickly or whatever. And I was just like sitting and talking with, random people, and they were explaining the difference between Tahitian and Samoan. And I was like, oh, I'm so ignorant. But it was like really good for me, because they were like, yeah, we don't go to luau's, and it was a specific kind of like dance, and it's escaping me now, but I was like, this is what I'm talking about. You have to be able to, one, do the work, and two, take the time to make sure that you're curating this experience where you honor the place that you go to, and making sure that you're spending your money in a way that's systematically helpful to the people.
I feel like tourism should nourish the country and not just the economy, but like the actual country itself, the people. Because like when you go to a place and you just spend money, it's not going to benefit the country as a whole and the culture as a whole.
So there's a question here. A school advisor asked me if I wanted to rekindle my family heritage by studying over there.
I feel like that was part also of the book as well, with her going to Cuba because she wanted to find her heritage. I feel like the dualism of that is part of the Caribbean experience if you live somewhere that isn't the island that your family is from, which is like it's part of you, even if you haven't had the chance to go to the island. So it's kind of, I have like a complicated relationship with that, obviously, because I grew up on the island before I left.
Yeah. So that was a question I was going to ask. How do you feel about like second generation and taking into consideration not the same kind of constraints that say like a Cuba might have? How do you feel about second generation or any generation removed once a family immigrates away from the island? Because I feel like our connection to the language, to customs, totally different, but then we have this shared experience, right, of identifying with this group. So what do you think about?
Well, Sajid, I feel like you, as the person who's still on the island,
Yeah,
because I see
mean,
people on Twitter from the islands are like, they don't like when people have like the flag
yeah. Ooh.
in their.
Listen, Caribbean Twitter can get really petty sometimes. I don't have an issue with. I am a firm believer in historical context. I think historical context is really, really important to a person's experience. So if you grew up in Canada or the States, but your parents are from the Caribbean, I think it's okay for you to acknowledge that and put the flag in your bio and be proud of that heritage because you ultimately are born of a different history, right?
Mm-hmm.
You exist because of what your ancestors in the Caribbean went through. So I think it's your right. But I do think that the difference needs to be. I think that there's a difference and that needs to be acknowledged too. You know, like a Caribbean American person versus somebody who's from like the island versus somebody like say you, Paige, who you grew up on the island, left eventually. I think everybody's experience needs to be understood as individual experience and not just like, you know, well,
One
I'm
broad.
Trinidadian. Cardi B's mother was from Trinidad, so we're both like the same thing, you know. So
And we are not, right? Right.
I mean, I don't know how to speak to like being second generation because I'm of the privileged position where I was born and raised in one country where my parents are from, where my grandparents and my great grandparents are from, and I'm passing on majority. So the whole conversation of being an immigrant and being a minority and having that connection with your homeland or whatnot is not necessarily something that I experience. So I don't really know how to feel about it sometimes.
I think that was like probably the hardest thing when I moved away because I moved to America and no longer the majority. And I don't think I understood racism until I moved to America because I was used to classism. So that was like the lens that I viewed oppression. And it took me a long, long time to understand that no, you could be treated differently because you're not of the majority. And for a long time, I felt like that's why I couldn't connect with Black Americans because I was just like, I don't understand your experience. But eventually I was just like, your experience is definitely indicating access to things and that, you know, as someone coming in, I had access to because my family. You don't leave the island unless you have a plan. Like you were moving with someone, and so you had to have some kind of economic stability to do that, right? And so I don't think I understood my privilege until I got into college, which was like years after I got there. So
I feel like it was the same for me. Like it's sort of different because I feel like more now that I've been living in Canada for so long, I feel like less like connected to Barbados as I did when I first did, because when I first moved, I would go back every summer, every Christmas. But now it's like once every year I get to go back for a very short period of time. So like I still feel like I'm Barbadian, but I don't feel like I have that much of a hold on it as I did when I first moved. Like I feel like I don't have like the same authority over the culture as I once did because things change so much year by year. So like things are happening that I don't realize. Like my friends will tell me like prices for this are going up and all these struggles that they're having that I don't have to experience anymore because I live in a different country. So I feel like it's people can acknowledge this is their heritage. They have a very different relationship with it, but like also not barring them from saying like, oh, I'm Jamaican, but like I'm Jamaican Canadian versus like I'm full blood Jamaican. I speak with the accent, all that stuff. Because I feel like that happens in Toronto specifically because all the Caribbean people cluster together in specific areas of the city. So you do get the accent a little bit.
Yeah,
it's just
that's
different
another
coming
thing
from the island.
like about like Caribbean American and like Caribbean Canadian people is like there's a solidarity that the diaspora has, like, Trinidadians, St. Lucians, Jamaicans, we're all Caribbean. Whereas in the Caribbean, we're all like on different islands and we don't have that same like experience of like and stuff like that. So that's something I also find interesting too.
Yeah, I definitely think I wasn't sure.
Hi, Blue. Luxurious Blue.
Am I still here?
Hey.
Am I still here?
You're here in voice, disembodied, but your video's gone.
What did I do? What did I do?
Maybe you put the X on video. Go look down and see if you muted the video. Okay.
Okay.
You're back.
See, this is why I shouldn't touch things. What were you saying?
I think you were saying, and then you disappeared.
Oh, no. Yeah, you were saying something. I was talking about Caribbean people having like solidarity in the diaspora that we don't have in the Caribbean.
Oh, what I was gonna say is I think it's interesting to hear the whole and I think we started to talk about this, like when the language, right, the solidarity sometimes is the language that separates us, because sometimes Latin or Spanish speaking Caribbean islands separate themselves out of the Caribbean. And I felt like in the book, it kind of started to talk about like that elitism from like Spanish colonization. But I was trying to explain to someone how Guyana is Caribbean, but I can't remember what the other island is not. But it was an actual island. I was like, you know what? Never mind. I can't.
I feel like it's just so complicated with the way, like, if you're taught in school in the Caribbean, you're taught a very specific, these are like the Caribbean countries.
Yeah.
But then if you're not from there, like you grew up in like Canada or the US, you're not really taught.
Yeah.
You see, the what makes it confusing is really colonization and the history of who colonized where. So like Guyana, most of mainland Latin America, the majority of it was colonized by Spain. So they have this one Latinx Spanish experience, right? That the Hispanic Caribbean islands could relate to, because they were also colonized by Spain and therefore treated in similar ways, right? So it's like they identify as both Caribbean and mainland Latin America and Latinx, because they're both islands and they also have that same historical experience as the countries that were colonized by Spain. But English-speaking Caribbean is kind of the same thing. You have Belize and Guyana, which were
That's
also
what
colonized.
it was. It was Belize, and I was
Belize is in Central America.
Yeah,
but they were also colonized by England, and because Britain colonized those two places, they treated them in the same way that they treated the islands that they colonized. So they all had similar histories. Especially Trinidad and Guyana have a very, very similar history, especially because it's the only, along with Suriname, which was a Dutch colonized country, they have like that commonality with huge Indian populations.
Yeah.
It's like it's weird, because what makes the Caribbean is not necessarily who's an island and who's not an island.
It's who was colonized by who.
But who was colonized by who. But then also Cuba and Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, islands in the region, and they still face things like hurricanes. They still face a lot of geographic, they have a lot of geographic similarities to us. So it's complicated, because when we were doing Caribbean studies in school, we learned different definitions of the Caribbean. There's the geographical definition, there's the historical definition, the cultural definition, and each definition encompasses a different set of countries.
Because I've definitely met Puerto Rican people who are like, I'm not Caribbean. I'm like, but
you kind of are.
Yeah.
And do not tell Guyanese people that they are not Caribbean.
They are not Caribbean.
Yes. They are Caribbean, and if you tell them they're not Caribbean, they will fight you.
Yes. Yeah.
It's true, because like, if think about it, like a Guyanese person has more cultural similarities to a Trinidadian than they do to Venezuelans who are right next door to them.
Right.
So
look at us giving history lessons.
I was going to say Professor Sajid over here breaking down the Caribbean.
Oh my God, I get no paid for it though. Hire me to do at your workplace or something.
Okay, so should we wrap up and say what we're reading next, which is
Yes.
somewhat
Which is.
in
Do
the
you
same
have the
sphere.
book, or do I need to go get it?
One of you needs to get the book because I don't have my copy yet.
Mine is at my that's my nightstand. I'll go get it.
Okay.
I'm very excited for this next read. Whenever it
I
arrives, I will start reading
know.
it. Hello. That is a very
Hey.
shot.
Oh my god. Okay. So who's going to do the drum roll? It's with the fire.
With the fire on high.
Yay. And we were talking about Caribbean American experiences, and I think this is the first we're reading for Bashment Book Club that's kind of set outside of the Caribbean, but follows the Caribbean characters. So big up to the Diaspora.
I'm very excited for this one. It was on my list to read in general, so I'm glad I managed to convince, even though one of you has already read it.
Then I already read everything.
Listen. You know, this is my stress relief. I have to do things. But with that being said, we have to figure out because there's this book box company that specifically does people of color. They focus on people of color. So I want to offer up the box because it is the fire with the fire on high. So we need to figure out how people can enter so we can get them. I will pay for you to get the book box.
Okay, so we're doing a giveaway for this one.
Yeah. Because I really just think it's important. Like, I believe in the way Elizabeth Acevedo does storytelling, especially with the care and concern of like our unique experience. And what I love specifically about this book is that she really talks about like this, how we have similar experiences, but as Black people, as Caribbean people, we do not have this homogeneous experience. And you know, there's this other piece that they go to a colonizers, and so like there's all of these interplaying pieces. So I feel like really important that we get this to someone. So once we figure out the giveaway,
we'll figure that part out. We also don't know when we're having our live show. We just know it's going to be late November sometime. Vaguely.
Also, the cover is just.
Oh yeah.
Take off the dust jacket so they can see.
Oh my god, that's gorgeous.
Look at that. It's amazing. Wait, are you almost finished?
No. I'm like literally like 20 pages in. I'm barely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to start reading that one once my copy comes in. Thank you very much for sending to me in the note.
You're welcome. I was just trying to read. Thank you, Purple Cat 345. They said that this is a very good talk. We tried.
I'm glad we were coherent for once.
Thank you.
And I was drinking.
Thanks for telling us after the fact.
To help my nerves, and my eyes are no longer red.
I was going to say your eyes aren't red.
Yeah, I was worried about
that. Oh my god.
She wasn't smoking weed, y'all. She wasn't.
She made sure to tell us that. She didn't say the
I made sure. I don't want no rumors about me.
It'd be on brand.
The weekend reader smokes weed. The weekend reader.
Oh my god. I'm dead. I can't.
That's funny. I gotta use that one. Okay. I'm sorry. Paige, you're trying to wrap us up. So, Sajid.
Sure. What about Sajid?
I have to. Right.
Oh, yes. It's your channel. You have to wrap up.
Okay.
Yes. I hope you read it with us too.
Yes, please read it with us, everybody. Okay. So, should we wrap up now?
Oh, I don't know.
Sure. We can get into our whole discussion about us writing Caribbean books called the Beach Bay series later.
Oh, yes.
No. We're supposed to sing a song.
Oh, go. I told you a song to sing. You.
Listen, I don't know if I want to. Okay.
Oh, wait. Shane says The Weekend Reefer.
Oh my God, no.
No. I work for a public institution of higher education. You will not get me on a case.
Oh God, my baby nephew is kind of competing with the vocals in the background there.
Well, he's giving you the background music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So what song we singing?
Havana.
I gave you a suggestion.
Like backup vocals, I give up on Paige. I don't think she'll ever sing.
I will never. No, you will have to get a lot of alcohol in me and put me in a Korean karaoke bar.
I hear challenge for the next time. Okay. So one sometime in November we're going to read With the Fire on High, and it's going to be on Paige's channel.
Yes.
We're going to do a giveaway eventually.
We'll figure that part out.
And then Sajid.
I have to sing the song now. Okay, y'all. I mean, the book is called Next Year in Havana, so it's kind of obvious what song we're going to sing. Okay.
I love that you keep saying we.
I'm dancing. I'm
speaking as a collective.
Oh, okay. I approve of that.
Havana, unana. Half of my heart is in Havana, unana. It's coming back to East Atlanta, unana. Hey, Havana. There's something about his manners. Havana.
Look
Very proud. Thank you. That was great. 10 out of 10. You and those noises. Oh my God.
Lordy Lord. Okay, so y'all, we are writing. This is another announcement. The three of us are working on a series. We are writing an erotic Caribbean.
Erotic.
Right? Okay. By we, I mean Paige and Lynell gone write it. I'm just going to design the book covers and come up with the title.
I'm glad that I'm learning about this with you guys.
I just said if we're going to do this, there needs to be smut. Now it escalated.
She can write the smut.
Really quickly.
I give you full reign.
To erotica. Listen. Okay, but what are we doing?
We said we're going to write books because there aren't enough books for us to choose from that are set in the actual Caribbean.
Yeah, that's not like an actual problem. Like this.
Yeah.
So we're going to write a series called the Beach Bay series.
The Beach Bay series.
Yeah. And the first one is going to call we're going to call it Naughtiness Under the Mango Tree.
I like it.
I love it.
But
expect it to come on Wattpad soon.
We also have to do one where there's mystery, there's sci-fi, there's one with some speculative fiction. We just need to cover every genre.
Just all of them. Yeah.
We need to have like a little revolution in the Caribbean.
Honestly.
We'll be the bearded ones of the literature field. I already have a beard.
I mean...
Oh, by the way, we're actually writing a series in case anybody is taking us seriously.
Wait,
imagine.
Say that again.
I said we're not actually writing a series in case anybody takes us seriously. Like they go on Amazon looking for our book.
Oh, I love that kind of support, though.
Yeah, eventually.
Appreciate it. Yeah, maybe, you never know.
I don't know about the three, but eventually somebody needs to write a fucking Caribbean book. In Barbados, please.
Right.
My God.
I think
maybe that's somebody's you page.
Yeah.
Listen, I have been trying to write this witchy Barbadian thing for so long, and I gave up over the summer. Maybe for NaNoWriMo, I'll get back to it. But
yeah, that's it. I want to write a book set in Trinidad, but I feel like I have to like learn how to write first.
Y'all stop it. Your voices are needed. Okay. So write the book.
Witchy book coming 2020.
What is that saying? If your story isn't being told, you tell it. Isn't that a saying or something?
I'm sure somebody said that at some point.
Well, all I know is if you write a book, I will buy 5 copies and make everybody in my social support, my support, whatever the network is, everyone will get a copy.
I love that. We can alternate writing each a chapter. Okay, let's do it, fam.
Shane, we can make it a 4-person project. We'll invite Shane to come on.
Yes, let's do it. Okay, shall we end this live?
Yeah, before we talk more shit.
Honestly, I feel like this is the point where we just start going on.
It's because we miss each other. We just want to continue, but we'll just move it to WhatsApp.
We'll just text, and Sajid can send us the voice notes like normal.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to go and follow Linnell's blog. I said Linnell. Wow. Maybe I'm... Go follow Linnell's blog and go and subscribe to Paige's channel. And read with the fire and high with us. Get it out of your library. Steal it. Don't steal it.
Don't steal it. Make sure she gets paid.
Yeah, make sure
and we will post details about the giveaway eventually when we figure that shit out, whenever that is.
Follow us on social media on Twitter.
Bashment. Yeah. Yep. Cool.
And we will see you in November.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. So